Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of BTTH Rebirth of Emperor Yang episode number 54 based on novel. So let's start. Boom. The thundering sound spread. Yang Bing and Hu Laoge also changed their faces suddenly in the sky. This sudden change caught them a little unprepared, but the next moment, when the two people looked at Xiao Yang, they suddenly realized that it was no wonder that the Dan Lei had just dispersed. How could it gather again at the moment? It must be that Xiao Yang's imperial pill was successfully refined. Tut tut, unexpectedly, it's only the first time to refine imperial Dan medicine. It can be successfully refined. Rock Owl, it's really not easy. Looking at the round elixir still wrapped by strange fire in Xiao Yangding at the moment, old monster who could not help feeling a burst of surprise. Xiao Yang's talent is really beyond imagination. Refining imperial elixir for the first time can succeed. If you refine it several times in the future, wouldn't you even pay attention to imperial elixir? At the thought of this, Hu Laoge's eyes suddenly coagulated, and he couldn't help feeling dignified in his heart. He has seen Xiao Yang's growth speed. Since Xiao Yang is on the opposite side of him now, he must not let Xiao Yang continue to grow. Otherwise, when the time comes, he may be difficult to defeat. Never let him grow up again. With a cold hum in his heart, the old Hu monster moved suddenly, crossed the void in an instant, and rushed to kill Xiao Yang on the void square. For enemies like Xiao Yang who have not yet fully grown up, the best way is to strangle them in the cradle. However, when Hu started, Jiu Li also found the abnormality in Xiao Yang's medicine tripod on the referee's bench. Although he didn't pay attention at the beginning, Jiu Li immediately understood after Dan Lei gathered. No wonder Xiao Yanning pill hasn't seen any movement for a long time. It turned out to be improving the quality of pills, although the risk of doing so is very high. A little carelessness will lead to the failure of refining pills, but it seems that Xiao Yang really succeeded. Seeing that old monster who wanted to do it, Jiu Li immediately gave a cold hum and moved. He immediately stood in front of old monster who, waved his big sleeve, stared at old monster who and shouted, "Old monster who, do you want to fight with our herbalist guild in this wild ancient city?" Hu Laoge frowned when he saw Jiu Li blocking the way. If it was normal, Hu Laoge would immediately fight with him, even if he would give him a chance to talk more. But now, after resisting Dan Lei, his strength is also consumed. At this time, even if the war is difficult to achieve results, but otherwise, there is no one to stop the imperial pill in Xiao Yangding. Jiu Li, I'll meet you. With a cold hum, another old man dressed in ice blue robes came forward abruptly, also standing in front of Jiu Li. Seeing this, the old monster who behind him suddenly showed a smile on his face. At the critical moment, Yang Bing was able to stand on the united front with him. Seeing Yang Bing blocking Jiu Li, Hu Laoge flashed again, bypassed the two people and continued to rush towards Xiao Yang. "Hey, don't forget, after passing Guli, there's still me." With a cry, red Phosphorus's body flashed out and stopped in front of old Hu again. The latter frowned again. In this way, he and Yang Bing were stopped by the two people. Can't he only watch the birth of Xiao Yendi Dan? Boom! The thundering sound came again, making everyone's face change again. Jiu Li and red Phosphorus also frowned. Dan Lei didn't come early or late. It happened that when they were restrained, Xiao Yang was alone. If Dan Lei fell, who could help him resist Dan Lei? Hu Laoge and Yang Bing, standing opposite them, are happy at the moment. In this way, they are not afraid that they can't deal with Xiao Yang. They have seen the power of Dan Lei. As long as no one helps Xiao Yang resist Dan Lei, in his current situation, as long as Dan Lei falls, not only the imperial pill in the medicine tripod will be destroyed, but also Xiao Yang will die. Kill two birds with one stone, why not? Hehe, in that case, you two will stay here with us. No one wants to go up. Hu Laoge sneered, put his arms around his chest and looked sarcastically at the red Phosphorus opposite, but his body shape turned behind him and stopped him. In this way, Jiu Li and red Phosphorus were restrained by Hu Laoge and Yang Bing. At present, except Shen Laro on the stand, I'm afraid no one can resist the Dan Lei. At this moment, Shen Laro and the young man beside him also looked at each other. Even with Xuanlao's strength, the pair of deep old eyes also showed a deep dignified color. He had just seen Dan Lei's arrogance. If he came again at this moment, it would be difficult to resist alone. He is not the only one who thinks like this. The young man beside him is also very dignified. I'm afraid they are the only people who can help Xiao Yang resist this Dan Lei in the field at the moment. If they don't do it, I'm afraid Xiao Yang will be doomed this time. Alas. Young lord, what do you think? The young man gently patted the jade fan in his hand in the palm, thinking about the most favorable way. He could not ignore the Shenlaro beside him for Xiao Yang, so he must think of a way to have the best of both worlds. Alas. There's nothing I can do. If I can't do it later, old Shen, you'll go up and carry it first. When I save the rock owl, I'll let him go. Shenlaro nodded gently when he heard the speech, but there was still a trace of worry between his eyebrows. He was afraid that the rock owl would not easily give up the imperial pill he had worked hard to refine. Thorn la la. Suddenly, a thunderous thunder suddenly came out. Between heaven and earth, Jiu Li, Red Phosphorus, Shenlaro and young men all changed their faces. The Dan Lei came after all. On the horizon, a thick black Dan thunder of hundreds of feet fell from the sky and roared straight to the beast tripod on the stone platform below. If this blow fell, I'm afraid it would be really hard to escape death with Xiao Yang's state at the moment. But even so, Xiao Yang devoted himself to the medicine tripod in front of him. He just separated a trace of mind and waited for the arrival of Dan Lei. Drink. Want to hurt him? Pass me first. Suddenly, there was a fierce drink from the void square. Everyone looked up and saw a figure standing in front of the falling Dan Lei. As soon as they saw it, they immediately showed a look of surprise. At the moment, on the stand, Shenlaro, who was about to fight, and the young man sitting next to him, were also shocked by this sudden scene. When he saw the man, their faces couldn't help changing. Unexpectedly, he would stand up for Xiao Yang to block this Dan Lei. At this moment, standing in the void, he looked up at the Dan Lei man with a dignified face. It was Qin Zhong saved by Xiao Yang a month ago. Facing Dan Lei with the strength of 3-star semi-emperor, in everyone's opinion, this is extremely stupid. Hu Laoge and Yang Bing also looked at Qin Zhong with a sneer, showing disdain in their eyes. Jiu Li and Kai Phosphorus felt warm for Qin Zhong. Although Qin Zhong didn't have a deep friendship with Xiao Yang, because Xiao Yang saved him once, he could stand up for Xiao Yang. I'm afraid few people present could do this. With this alone, Qin Zhong is a respectable man. Haha, brother Yang Xiao, please don't worry. I'm here today. I'll let you feel at ease to refine medicine. Dan Lei, even if I'm fighting for my life, I'll stop it for you. Wow. Some sincere words can get a lot of applause in the Square City, and Xiao Yang also heard the decisive intention in the words. Qin Zhong didn't do it. Xiao Yang saved his life. He was grateful. Now Xiao Yang is in trouble, and he tries his best to help. Even Xiao Yang has to admire it. On the stand, Shenlaro nodded with emotion in his heart, stood up slowly and was always ready to help. Such kind-hearted people are quite consistent with his appetite, emotion, and reason, and are bound to help each other, not to mention their general purpose. The young man on one side could not help smiling and nodding. This was not only because of Qin Zhong's loyalty and courage, but also because of Xiao Yang. It was because Xiao Yang saved him that he would treat him so sincerely. Thorn la la. In the face of Qin Zhong's cold drink, Dan Lei also seems to feel general, and the speed of falling is even more terrible, which makes Qin Zhong's face more dignified. Although the words are full, Dan Lei is also really terrible, but today, he must use his own body to block the sky for Xiao Yang anyway. Drink. With a roar of anger, Qin Zhong's fighting spirit suddenly burst out wildly, and then his body moved suddenly, which was like a shell, and blasted hard at the oncoming Dan Lei. Boom. Unfortunately, with Qin Zhong's strength, the gap is still too obvious in the face of the Dan Lei. In the end, although the Dan Lei dispersed, Qin Zhong was also seriously injured. He was blasted down from the void like a meteor. He fell on the empty field and smashed it directly, then it fell into the wild ancient city below, smashing a huge pit tens of feet. Thorn la la. When Qin Zhong was defeated by one strike, the Dan Lei became more and more powerful. As soon as the strike fell, another more terrible Dan Lei suddenly fell and bombarded Xiao Yang below. Looking at the posture, it seemed that it was going to kill Xiao Yang at one fell swoop. At the moment, in the deep pit below, Qin Zhong was almost seriously injured. If he did it again, he was afraid that he would really have his life back. But at the moment, Qin Zhong's eyes watched the Dan Lei fall again, and his heart was also a burst of anxiety. His injured body was forced to shake, his body flew out again, and rushed away again towards the Dan Lei above the void. Drink. I'll take this blow on my behalf. Just as Qin Zhong's eyes looked at him and Xiao Yang was about to catch up, there was another old voice in the sky. Then, Xuanlao's body stood in the air, looked at the falling Dan Lei with a dignified face, and the fighting spirit gathered rapidly in his thin palm. Then he suddenly waved it and blasted it up at the Dan Lei. Boom! The roar of an explosion fell, and Dan Lei dispersed. Xian Lao also trembled slightly. He removed the great force from his body, and his dry palm trembled. Dan Lei was so terrible. Even with his strength, he suffered a lot. It's hard to imagine how much Qin Zhonggang had to pay for that attack. At this time, Qin Zhong also flew forward, barely supporting his body, and arched his hand to Xian Lao. Xian Lao gently waved his hand to tell him that he didn't have to do so. At the same time, Qin Zhong took a pill into Qin Zhong's hand and let him take it. Then, Xian Lao turned his eyes and looked at the young man on the stand. They touched each other's eyes and immediately understood what he meant in his heart. As long as you wait for old Hui Shen to block a Dan Lei for Qin Zhong for Xiao Yang, the young man on the stand immediately starts to rescue Xiao Yang from the stone platform. As for the imperial pill that has been successfully refined and only needs to be baked, it will be destroyed with him. Boom! Above the sky, the thunder clouds rolled and seemed to be brewing a terrible bombardment. Under the thunder clouds, Qin Zhong and Xian Lao, who had just recovered, looked at the terrible thunderclouds above his head with dignity. The fighting spirit in Xuanlao's body was mentioned quietly. Even with his strength, he was afraid of the thunderclouds. Although he is not sure to completely block the thundercloud, if he only stops a blow, Xianlao is also sure. Although he may have to suffer from the thunder of Dan Lei at that time, it is better than taking it all out. Boom! The dark thunder clouds rolled over again. Old General Shen looked at Qin Zhong and frowned slightly. Although Qin Zhong was loyal and courageous, he was a little stubborn. Even if he was present at the moment, he insisted on staying here. If Dan Lei fell later, old Shen would have no time to take into account his safety. Hihi, why don't you go down first, brother? I can be alone here. Your injuries are really serious. I'm afraid I'll be distracted here. Hearing Xuanlao's words, although Qin Zhong also wanted to stay, it was all for Xiao Yanhao after all. If Xianlao distracted him at the critical moment, Xiao Yang would be in trouble. Therefore, he nodded with a bitter smile and flew down 100 feet, but he still didn't want to move away. Xianlao was also helpless about this, and just at this time, a crack suddenly opened in the thunder cloud in the sky, and then the thunder shook, and a terrible Dan Lei crashed down, just like a world-shaking giant sword, pounding against Xianlao. Xianlao didn't dare to underestimate this at all. His fighting spirit suddenly surged in his body. His hands were quickly lifted to his chest, and his fingertips changed rapidly. At the same time, in the void in front of him, a giant finger with a width of 100 feet was quickly condensed, and then he blasted with it at the moment when Dan Lei fell. Boom! With a roar, the whole void square was shocked, and the terrible Gangfeng Dun time raged, so that there were terrorist cracks running through the whole square on the void square. Shua! With the sound of a broken wind, the figure of the young man has appeared beside Xiao Yang. He stretched out his arm and wanted to take Xiao Yang away by force. Boom! As soon as his palm touched Xiao Yang's body, a bright golden light flashed from Xiao Yang. The young man also changed his face suddenly, and his body suddenly retreated. He covered his just stretched palm with one hand, looked at Xiao Yang with fear, and the muscles at the corners of his mouth twitched. This guy. Why does something hit me every time I touch you? I'm also kind to help you. Fortunately, this response is timely, otherwise I don't know what to do by you. Cough, Kim, be safe. He whispered in his heart that the golden light just now was Xiao Jin. Oh, sorry, there are a lot of little guys in my body. I promise I won't do this again next time. There was no action. Xiao Yang just smiled with a little effort and didn't say much. Luo Jin also skimmed his mouth. He was really a little helpless about this. Well, let me do the next thing. Let old Shen and Qin Zhong back away first. I'll deal with Dan Lei. As soon as Xiao Yang's voice fell, Luo Jin's face suddenly changed. With Xiao Yang's current situation, how can we deal with this Dan Lei? Xiao Yang now has a hard word with Luo Jin. It's even more impossible to deal with Na Dan Lei. Luo Jin's eyes turned slightly and his eyebrows wrinkled again. Although he didn't have much contact with Xiao Yang, he was also familiar with Xiao Yang. He was definitely not the kind of guy who liked to show off his ability, and he couldn't die in vain. Now that he had said these words, he must have his own grasp. What Luo Jin didn't quite understand was Xiao Yang's grasp. Where did it come from? Is it the thing that almost hurt him? Thinking of this, Luo Jin couldn't help shaking his head. Although the thing was special just now, it wasn't so terrible since it didn't hurt Luo Jin. Otherwise, with Luo Jin's cultivation, how could he avoid the strong blow? Luo Jin shrugged his shoulders and said softly, Well, in that case, I won't ask more. I just hope I can introduce the guy in your body to me in the future. Otherwise, I'm not beaten. I don't know who it is. I'm not used to being beaten for nothing. Hearing the speech, Xiao Yang smiled and reprimanded Xiao Jin in his heart again, laughing. Okay. When the time is ripe, I'll introduce him to you. Don't be surprised at that time. As soon as the voice fell, Xiao Yang stopped talking, leaving only Luo Jin with a curious face. Listening to Xiao Yang's words, he became more and more interested in the guy in Xiao Yang's body. Then he stopped thinking, moved, and quickly flew back to the grandstand. At the same time, a voice was also introduced into the ears of Shenlaro and Qin Zhong like the wind. He, both of you should step down. Brother Yang Xiao has his own way to deal with this Dan Lei. Hearing these words, Shenlaro immediately frowned. Listening to the meaning of these words, Luo Jin didn't forcibly take Xiao Yang out, but relatively speaking, he was a little curious. What reassurance did the rock owl give Luo Jin to eat, and he could really let him escape? After a little hesitation, Shenlaro was helpless to shake his head. Since Luo Jin chose to believe Xiao Yang, he didn't have much to say. When his body moved, he quickly withdrew and drove away. Qin Zhong, however, was still worried when he heard this. He also saw that the Dan Lei was about to fall again. Although he wanted to resist, he was powerless. He hesitated for a long time. Only then did he flash out of the circle, but he always paid attention to Xiao Yang's safety. Once there was anything wrong, he would act immediately. On the void, Jiu Li and Red Phosphorus frowned when they saw this. At the moment, Shenlaro and Qin Zhong both chose to quit. Isn't Xiao Yang unsupported again? If so, the result would be really dangerous. Damn it. What's going on? At the critical moment, these two guys quit. They quit. What about the rock owl? Jiu Li was furious when he saw this. Just now he was moved by Qin Zhong's loyalty and courage. At the moment, he swept away those emotions. Qin Zhong's water is too fast. On the contrary, when Hu Laoge saw this, he showed a smile again. It's okay to see Qin Zhong's hand just now. However, a mere 3-star and half emperor is not as rebellious as Xiao Yang. Naturally, it doesn't matter in front of Dan Lei. But when he saw Shenlaro coming forward, his heart was a little unstable. Xuanlao's identity represented Union Pavilion. His coming forward didn't mean that Union Pavilion was also helping Xiao Yang. The defection of Union Pavilion made even old people such as Yang Bing feel a little scared. Obviously, he also felt a little about the deterrent power of Union Pavilion. But at the moment, seeing Shenlaro and Qin Zhong leave one after another, their hearts are happy again. Now, the rock owl has nothing to do. However, on the other side, their hearts could not help wondering. The two left together, but there were some strange things. Qin Zhong shouted loudly to protect the rock owl with his life under the eyes of everyone in the whole wild ancient city. How can it be so sudden? Is it difficult? It's all the ghost caused by the rock owl? Boom. Without waiting for them to think more, the boundless thunder clouds rolled up again in the sky. The roaring thunder was like an earthquake. Everyone's thoughts were interrupted in an instant. They looked at Xiao Yang at the moment. Without the protection of Qin Zhong and Shenlao, from the current Xiao Yang's point of view, facing that Dan Lei, it would be a dead end. On the stand, Shenlao also looked at Xiao Yang with a slight frown. His heart was full of questions. He really didn't think that with Xiao Yang's current situation, what could he do if no one helped him? Luo Jin, on the side of Shenlao, looked at Xiao Yang with an indifferent smile. He also had questions in his heart. How can Xiao Yang resist the Dan Lei, and how many of his means? Thorn la la. The thunder cloud rolled, a crack suddenly opened, and then the terrible Dan Lei like a giant sword fell again. This time, without the obstruction of Qin Zhong and Shenlao, he directly broke through the air and hit Xiao Yang. If this blow falls, I'm afraid that from the strength of Xiao Yang's heyday, he will inevitably be injured. What's more, Xiao Yang will face it in this state at the moment. If he is really hit, Xiao Yang will be blown to powder on the spot. Whoosh dash. On the horizon, at the moment when the Dan Lei fell, the light on Xiao Yang's finger flickered slightly. Then, a strong dark figure suddenly burst out from Xiao Yang's face and rushed straight to the terrible Dan Lei coming from the sky. When all the people in the audience fixed their eyes on the dark figure, even Luo Jin and Shenlao too on the stand at the moment changed their faces rapidly. This thing in front of them is what Xiao Yang said to be used to deal with Dan Lei? This is his way. The muscles in the corners of the Xuanlao's eyes couldn't help but twitch violently. Can the Taoist ghost become a sharp weapon to solve the Dan Lei? This is not nonsense. For a moment, Shenlaro couldn't help shouting angrily, and Luo Jin on his side immediately twisted his eyebrows. Xuanlao's words were also in his heart. How can he resist Dan Lei with a puppet? The most important thing is that the puppet's strength is only the level of 7-star dual saint. A puppet of this strength, I'm afraid it's impossible to bear even Dan Lei's blow. At this moment, the three of Qin Zhongguli changed their faces together. It's hard to imagine that the way Xiao Yang used to deal with Dan Lei was a puppet without the slightest breath of life, and the puppet's strength will be so unbearable. In the sky, Guli and Kai Phosphorus looked unbelievably at the puppet that rushed out. They couldn't figure it out anyway. Xiao Yang would use a puppet to resist Dan Lei. This guy, is this crazy? How can it be possible to rely on a puppet to resist Dan Lei? How can it be the opponent of Dan Lei just because he managed to reach the strength of the 7-star dual saint? Jiu Li's body trembled slightly in the void, and his heart was extremely nervous. The palms under his sleeves and robes were tightly held together. On his forehead, he also gradually burst out a cold sweat of drops and beans. He really couldn't believe this scene in front of him. When Hu Laoge saw this scene, he couldn't help but pick his eyebrows slightly. He also couldn't think that Xiao Yang would use this pediatric thing to deal with Dan Lei. He really thought Dan Lei could resist casually. Even the Dan Lei brought by Mo Zhai's Shumi pill is enough to make the two 8-star and half-emperor strong men lose a lot of strength. At present, the Dan Lei brought by Xiao Yang's imperial robbery pill is more powerful than the former. With such a puppet of 7-star fighting saint level, he also dreams of fighting Dan Lei. Isn't it a joke? At this moment, even many people in the wild ancient city below were shocked by the puppet, but at the same time, they couldn't help laughing. The Dan Lei brought by Emperor's pill can't be resisted by a puppet at the level of fighting saint. You know, the Dan Lei has caused great losses to two 8.5 Emperor strongmen in the sky. How can it be solved by this puppet? At this moment, everyone in the field is full of doubts about Xiao Yang's puppet. After all, the puppet's strength is too weak. It can't be matched by this thing alone. Under the eyes of many skeptics, Xiao Yang wholeheartedly focused on the pill in the tripod and ignored all the changes in the outside world. Finally, the puppet was bombarded with Dan Lei in the eyes of countless people. Boom! With a deafening roar of terror, the puppet of the 7-star dual saint level was blown out by Dan Lei in an instant. His dark body was like a big iron block, tearing the void and smashing into the earth below. When people looked up, the puppet was indeed blown away. However, the terrible Dan Lei falling from the sky disappeared in an instant, as if it had disappeared out of thin air. This scene immediately made people think of the puppet. Is it the puppet who forcibly scattered the Dan Lei? Wow dash. As soon as I thought of it, the whole audience was in an uproar. If so, isn't this puppet really unusual? It can directly disperse a Dan Lei that makes the 8-star and half-emperor strong have to wait solemnly. If it is spread, I'm afraid it will cause a great sensation in the world of medicine refiners. After all, Dan Lei, this is what every herbalist expects and fears. If they can lead to Dan Lei, it means that they have achieved something. But Dan Lei's terror also gives them a headache. Now, there is a puppet who can resist Dan Lei. Isn't that a dream of thousands of herbalists? Thorn la la. A thunder sounded, and the thunder cloud seemed to be angered at this moment. When the thunder cloud rolled, the terrible Dan Lei fell one after another, bombarded Xiao Yang hard, and vowed to smash Xiao Yang into slag. Bang! At this moment, in the earth below, there was a burst sound, and then a dark figure like a meteor burst out in an instant. It was the North King. The North King appeared, and his fists were suddenly clenched. When he moved, he had swept up into the sky. Facing the Dan Lei that had just fallen, the North King punched out fiercely and directly met the Dan Lei. Boom! With one blow, Dan Lei suddenly fell into an endless abyss at the moment he touched it. He was instantly absorbed into the body by the North King. Only the rest of the thunder flowed on the North King's body and became a part of the North King's strength. Boom! 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 Above the sky, the North King rushed like a god of war against the sky in the midst of thousands of thunder. Countless people below were stunned. I've seen people who resist Dan Lei, but they've never seen anyone so resist Dan Lei. Whenever a Dan Lei falls in the thundercloud, the North King rushes up in an instant and smashes it on his body as soon as he catches the Dan Lei. Although his body will be smashed into a terrible pit, it will recover again after only a few breaths, and then he will catch the Dan Lei again. Like this, where is the fight against Dan Lei? It's obviously catching Dan Lei like a loach. Look at the way Beiwang collided left and right. He had to plunge into the thunder cloud overhead and swallow it directly. Moreover, as those Dan Lei were continuously absorbed by the North King, several semi-imperial strongmen in the sky also quickly found that the strength of the North King was also rising at an extremely terrible speed. At this moment, the strength of the North King has reached the level of the 8-star Dual Saint from the initial stage of the 7-star Dual Saint. Moreover, the strength of the North King is still improving. These Dan Lei were completely swallowed up by the North King. At this moment, everyone finally understood. No wonder Xiao Yang dared to use a puppet with strength only at the level of fighting saint to resist Dan Lei. I see. This puppet is completely Dan Lei's nemesis. As long as there is Dan Lei, he will be swallowed up by him, and then become the nourishment for his growth strength. In this way, coupled with Xiao Yang's identity as a herbalist, the growth of this puppet is more than that of some talented children of great power. It is hard to imagine what a terrible level this puppet's strength will reach in the future. Hu Leogay and others looked at the puppet and finally completely exposed their dignified look. Up to now, they have to admit that Xiao Yang's strength is really terrible. Not only his own cultivation talent is terrible, but even this puppet will be so rebellious. It's hard to imagine how terrible it would be if he really waited until he grew up completely. On the stand, Shen Lao and Luo Jin also looked shocked. Even they saw such strange puppets for the first time. This puppet is really powerful. No wonder Xiao Yang is so relieved of it. Boom. One punch, thunder break. Suddenly, the breath on Beiwang seems to have completely stepped into the level of half-emperor, but even now, the thunder clouds above his head still have no intention to disperse. It seems that these Dan Lei not only can't hurt Xiao Yang, but also want to add a fire to Xiao Yang's overall strength. Boom. Lei Yun rolled again. At this moment, Lei Yun has reached the final stage. At this time, the strength of the North King has stepped into the level of 6-star and half-emperor. On the surface, it is not weak compared with Li Gan, the ancestor of the Li family. I just don't know which will be stronger or weaker if the two fight. The thunder clouds did not disperse. This time, the North King rushed into the rolling thunder clouds in the stunned eyes of all the people. Boom! Boom! After a burst of deafening thunder, a strong figure with black smoke flew out, and the thunder clouds gradually dispersed. At this time, the strength of the North King has been completely stable at the 6-star and half-emperor level. Xiao Yang has benefited a lot from the refining of Imperial Pill this time. Thorn La La. On the void, the North King's strong figure like Mount Tai slowly fell down. His body shape was suspended on one side of Xiao Yang's body. Dan Lei, which had not been completely swallowed, was running on his dark body surface, making the surrounding void crackle. Dan Lei dispersed. At this moment, Xiao Yang was really relieved. The Imperial Pill in the tripod was finally refined successfully. Cool dash. After a long breath, the turbid qi held in his chest, Xiao Yang's face quickly became pale, and his sitting body could not help swinging gently. The extreme consumption of fighting spirit and soul power made Xiao Yang difficult to support. In his heart, Xiao Yanqiang opened his eyes and wanted to close them. His teeth bit the tip of his tongue. Suddenly, a faint smell of fishy and sweet spread from his mouth. Xiao Yang also took the opportunity to quickly take out an Imperial Pill obtained from Haimu's ring. He didn't hesitate. He took it immediately. This Imperial Pill is more effective than the one given to Qin Zhong last time. However, in a moment, Xiao Yang was able to wake up a little and recover his empty fighting spirit. Taking a deep breath again, Xiao Yang slightly tilted his head and looked at the North King standing like an iron tower. There was a little sigh in his eyes. Dan Lei's strength has become the best tonic for the North King to improve his strength. After completely devouring those Dan Lei, the North King's overall strength is much higher than his master. Moreover, under Xiao Yang's eyes, on the black body surface of the North King, there are dark thunder flashing and lingering. These Dan Lei can no longer be swallowed up. It seems that they have become a part of the North King and contribute to the strength of the North King. Xiao Yang has seen the power of these Dan Lei. Even the 8-star and half-emperor dare not touch them easily. From this alone, we can see the scars of Dan Lei. Now the blessing is on the North King. I'm afraid it's an ordinary 7-star and half-emperor who dare not touch them. The Northern King's body is strong and powerful. It is the Taishu ancient dragon most famous for its strong body in the world of Warcraft. What's more, the original Northern Dragon King swallowed the blood and flesh of many dragon people, and his body is more powerful than ever. Coupled with the special refining of Xiao Yanyi Huo, He has the blessing of Danlei brought by the Imperial Pill. The current Northern King, I'm afraid that in addition to the old guy at the 8-star and half-emperor level like Hu Leoge, the North King has been invincible in the whole half-emperor class. In this way, the North King has become another great help to Xiao Yang. Looking at the pure dark horror monster in front of him, Xiao Yang showed a happy smile. Originally, he didn't think that the North King could resist all the Danlei. After all, the North King is nothing but a puppet. In essence, it is a killing machine. As long as it is a machine, the North King always has a limit. Xiao Yang was very surprised to see the strength of the North King breaking through the semi-imperial class. However, at the moment, when Xiao Yang's palm slowly stroked the North King's dark body, what he brought between his fingers was an extremely soft feeling like cowhide, which surprised Xiao Yang in his heart. In the past, Xiao Yang also refined a lot of puppets, but when his strength reached the limit, it was just the level of fighting respect. At that time, the puppet's body was already very hard, and it felt like a big iron block. At the moment, the situation presented by the North King is a great performance that his strength can be improved. In this way, it also aroused Xiao Yang's interest. He also wants to see where the limit of the North King in the future is. Thinking, Xiao Yang suddenly moved his mind. The dark giant god in front of him was like receiving an order. His strong body suddenly moved, his body tilted, and a whip leg was thrown out, smashing the void in front of the North King. Boom! With a terrible sonic boom, the emptiness in front of the North King burst under this attack, which also made the faces of the semi-imperial strong men who stood in the emptiness suddenly change. Even Jiu Li and others in the air suddenly become dignified. Although Xiao Yang's puppet strength is not as strong as them, few people can take over the bombardment of such power except them in the semi-imperial class. Unexpectedly, the power of this puppet is already strong. On the stand, Xuanlao's mouth also couldn't help a violent convulsion. He couldn't say a word in his heart, while Luo Jin on the side looked at the North King with his eyes slightly narrowed, and the bottom of his eyes glittered. Compared with the puppet that others valued Xiao Yang, Luo Jin was more curious about the skills Xiao Yang used to refine the puppet. After all, as long as you have that thing, if you want this puppet, you can catch it. However, a moment later, Luo Jin shook his head reluctantly and erased his intention. It's not cost-effective to inquire about his secret with Xiao Yang for a puppet. Cough. Suddenly, a violent cough came from the void square. Everyone looked up, but Mo Zhai slowly stood up from the stone platform and swept the whole audience slowly with his still pale face. However, there were not many people left on the void square at the moment, because the previous Danlei, the vast majority of people, had fallen into the wild ancient city. Cough. Another violent cough fell. On the void, Hu Leoge and Yang Bing, who were confrontation with Jiu Li, quickly returned to Mo Zhai. Now they have completely fallen out with Xiao Yang and others. If Xiao Yang took the opportunity to use his puppet to shoot Mo Zhai, they were really afraid it would be too late. Mo Zhai ignored these, but once again set his eyes on the medicine tripod in front of him, the refined Imperial Pill Shumi Pill. Although the Imperial Pill has been successfully refined, there is one more thing that needs the help of the two strong men in front of us. Otherwise, even if the Imperial Pill is refined, it will still be useless in the end. Hee, you two. Don't worry about them for the moment. After all, it's the period of the herbalist meeting. They don't dare to do it at will. I hope you can still focus on the next thing. When they heard the speech, they suddenly knew that old Hu's strange eyes swept Jiu Li and Yang Bing's eyes fell on Xiao Yang, which also made the latter frown again. Yang Bing's killing intention really made Xiao Yang feel an inexplicable feeling. Bang! With a bang, Mo Zhai slapped the medicine tripod in front of him. With this slap, the medicine tripod opened when it was covered, and the Imperial Pill, which was expected by all, also flew out slowly, suspended in the void and stood quietly. Mo Zhai saw this, but his face suddenly turned cold. With a wave of his big hand, he grabbed the Sumiton. This scene also made the people below stunned. Looking at Mo Zhai's action, it seemed that he was afraid that the Emperor Dan would run away. If he grabbed it with one claw, he would not be afraid to crush the Emperor Dan. Boom! At the next moment, a loud noise came out of the void, and Mo Zhai's body immediately went back. If there was no old monster behind him, he would fall under the stone platform. Be frightened and change color as like as two peas in the face of the public, the Emperor Dan has disappeared. At the moment, he is a fellow who looks exactly like Mo Zhai. This video will end here.